Hello everyone. Tonight, let's step quietly behind the stone walls of a medieval monastery, where the world moved slowly. Candles flickered in silence, and monks followed the same gentle rhythm every single day. Have you ever wondered what they actually ate? When meals were guided by prayer instead of hunger, no feasts, no luxury, only simple food prepared with patience, discipline, and devotion. As the monastery bells echo through the morning mist, we'll discover the humble meals that sustained monks for centuries, and how even a bowl of soup could become an act of peace, reflection, and spiritual calm. So settle in, relax, and journey back to a quieter time. In the medieval world, the daily meals of monks were shaped not by luxury or personal preference, but by discipline, prayer, agricultural rhythm, and religious rules that governed nearly every aspect of life. Inside monasteries scattered across Europe, from remote mountain abbeys to fertile river valleys, food was considered both nourishment for the body and a test of spiritual humility. Monks believed that eating too richly distracted the soul from God, so their diet reflected restraint, balance, and obedience rather than pleasure. Yet despite strict rules, medieval monasteries often became centers of skilled agriculture, brewing, baking, and food preservation, meaning monks sometimes ate better and more consistently than the peasants living outside monastery walls. A typical day began long before sunrise. After rising for the night office of prayer known as matins, monks returned briefly to rest or continued silent meditation until dawn. Breakfast, as modern people understand it, rarely existed. Many monastic rules, especially those influenced by Saint Benedict, discouraged eating early in the morning. Food was usually delayed until after several hours of prayer and labor. Hunger itself was considered spiritually beneficial, reminding monks of self-control and dependence on divine grace. When food finally appeared, it was simple and modest. Bread formed the foundation of nearly every monastic meal. Monasteries maintained their own grain fields, growing wheat, rye, barley, or oats, depending on regional climate. Bakers within the monastery rose before dawn to prepare loaves using large communal ovens. Bread varied widely in quality. Wealthy abbeys produced fine white wheat bread, while poorer communities relied on darker loaves made from rye or mixed grains. Bread was rarely eaten alone. It served as a utensil, soaking up soups, stews, or vegetable broths, and sometimes replaced plates entirely. Hard crusts might be reused as trenchers, absorbing sauces before being eaten or given to the poor. Alongside bread, monks frequently consumed pottage, a thick soup or porridge that could change daily depending on available ingredients. Pottage simmered slowly in large iron cauldrons over open hearth fires, combining legumes such as peas, lentils, or beans with vegetables harvested from monastery gardens. Cabbage, onions, leeks, carrots, turnips, garlic, and herbs flavored these dishes. Because monasteries were largely self-sufficient, gardens played a vital role in sustaining the community. Monks cultivated medicinal herbs as well as culinary plants, believing that food and healing were closely connected. The warm, filling nature of pottage made it ideal for long days of manual labor and prayer. Vegetables dominated the monastic diet. Unlike medieval nobles who prized meat as a sign of wealth, monks deliberately limited meat consumption. Many monastic rules prohibited eating the flesh of four-legged animals, except for the sick or elderly. This restriction encouraged reliance on plant-based foods long before vegetarianism became a modern concept. Beans, peas, and broad beans supplied protein, while root vegetables stored well through harsh winters. Monks became experts in preservation techniques such as drying, pickling, salting, and storing crops in cool cellars. Fish occupied an important place in monastic eating, especially on fasting days, which were frequent throughout the year. The Christian calendar included numerous periods when meat was forbidden: Lent, Advent, Fridays, vigils, and various holy observances, sometimes totaling nearly half the year. To adapt, monasteries built fish ponds stocked with carp, pike, eel, and trout. These ponds ensured a reliable source of protein even during strict fasting seasons. Fish might be boiled with herbs, baked in simple pies, or preserved through smoking and salting. Coastal monasteries enjoyed access to salted cod or herring transported through trade networks, demonstrating how religious rules influenced medieval economies. Cheese and dairy products appeared regularly, though moderation remained important. Monks kept cows, sheep, or goats, whose milk was transformed into butter, curds, and cheeses of varying hardness. Cheese offered long, lasting nutrition and required careful craftsmanship. Monastic communities became renowned for developing regional cheese traditions, many of which survived into modern European cuisine. Milk itself was less commonly drunk by adults, but was essential in cooking porridges and sauces. Eggs from monastery chickens added variety, especially during seasons when other protein sources were scarce. Fruit provided both nourishment and symbolic pleasure. Monasteries maintained orchards filled with apples, pears, plums, cherries, and walnuts. During harvest seasons, monks ate fresh fruit, but much of the produce was preserved for winter. Apples were dried, pears stored in cool rooms, and berries turned into simple preserves. Honey replaced sugar, which was rare and expensive. Beekeeping flourished within monasteries because honey served multiple purposes: sweetening food, preserving fruit, producing candles for church services, and creating medicinal remedies. Honeyed dishes offered small moments of sweetness within otherwise restrained diets. Beverages played an essential role in daily life. Water sources were not always safe, so monks commonly drank weak beer or ale, brewed within monastery walls. Brewing became one of the most advanced monastic crafts. The beer was usually low in alcohol, providing hydration and calories rather than intoxication. In wine-producing regions, monks drank diluted wine, often mixed with water. Wine held sacramental importance in Christian worship, ensuring its presence even in modest communities. Herbal infusions made from mint, sage, fennel, or chamomile were also consumed, valued for both flavor and medicinal benefits. Meals followed strict ritual. Silence dominated the dining hall, known as the refectory. Monks entered in orderly procession after prayer, washed their hands, and sat at long wooden tables. Instead of conversation, a designated reader stood at a lectern reciting scripture or spiritual texts while others ate. Eating became an act of contemplation rather than social enjoyment. The rhythm of chewing accompanied sacred words, reinforcing the belief that spiritual nourishment should accompany physical sustenance. The number of daily meals varied according to season. During winter, monks might eat earlier in the day due to shorter daylight hours. In summer, work extended longer, and meals were scheduled accordingly. Many monasteries allowed 2 meals daily outside fasting periods, a main meal around midday and a lighter evening meal called collation. During Lent, however, monks often reduced intake to 1 meal, podolten y, emphasizing penitence and reflection. Fasting was not merely dietary restriction, but a spiritual discipline meant to strengthen humility and empathy for the poor despite ideals of austerity. Historical records show variation among monasteries. Wealthy abbeys supported by noble patrons sometimes enjoyed surprisingly abundant kitchens. Special feast days honouring saints or major religious celebrations permitted richer foods. On such occasions, monks might eat spiced fish, elaborate pies, pastries sweetened with honey, or even limited amounts of meat. Feasts reinforced communal joy while still remaining within religious guidelines. These moments contrasted sharply with ordinary days of simplicity. Monastic hospitality also influenced what monks ate. Guests, pilgrims, and travellers frequently visited monasteries seeking shelter. Religious rules required hospitality as a sacred duty, often leading monks to serve better food to visitors than to themselves. Special guest refectories provided meals that could include meat or more refined bread, while the monastic community maintained its disciplined diet. Feeding strangers was considered service to God, reminding monks that generosity held greater spiritual value than personal comfort. Agricultural labour deeply shaped monastic cuisine. Many monks worked fields, tended livestock, harvested vegetables, and maintained vineyards. Their physical effort demanded steady nutrition, so meals focused on sustaining energy rather than delighting the palate. Seasonal cycles dictated menu changes: fresh greens in spring, abundant vegetables in summer, preserved foods in winter. Nothing was wasted. Vegetable scraps became soup stock, stale bread thickened stews, and leftover grains fed animals. Efficiency and gratitude governed the kitchen. Cooking itself was an organized responsibility. Certain monks served as cooks for set periods, rotating duties so that labor remained shared. Kitchen monks rose early to light fires, grind grains, chop vegetables, and monitor simmering pots. Recipes were rarely written. Knowledge passed through observation and repetition. Flavors relied on herbs grown nearby, rather than expensive imported spices. Parsley, thyme, sage, dill, and mustard seeds added variety without excess luxury. The aroma of simmering pottage or baking bread filled cloister corridors, blending domestic warmth with sacred routine. Health beliefs influenced food choices as well. Medieval medicine followed the theory of humours, which categorized foods as hot, cold, moist, or dry. Monks attempted to balance these qualities through diet, believing proper eating supported both physical health and spiritual clarity. Herbal gardens supplied remedies for digestion, sleep, or illness. Garlic and onions were valued for strength, while fennel aided digestion. Meals therefore served therapeutic purposes alongside nourishment. Regional differences shaped daily eating habits. Northern monasteries relied heavily on rye bread, cabbage, and salted fish due to colder climates. Beyond the regular rhythm of bread, vegetables, and fish, the daily food life of medieval monks contained many quiet details that rarely appear in popular history. Food was not only nourishment, but also a carefully controlled expression of obedience. Every monastery followed a written rule, most famously the rule of Saint Benedict, which described how much monks should eat, when they should eat, and even how they should feel about eating. The rule warned against gluttony, calling it one of the most dangerous spiritual weaknesses, because excessive appetite distracted the mind from prayer. For this reason, monks practiced restraint even when food was plentiful. They were encouraged to leave the table slightly hungry, believing moderation sharpened spiritual awareness. Seasonal fasting shaped much of what monks experienced throughout the year. During Lent, meals became noticeably plainer. Butter, eggs, and dairy were sometimes restricted, depending on local customs. Kitchens that normally prepared hearty pottage shifted toward thinner vegetable broths, flavored mainly with onions, herbs, and grains. The reduction in richness was intentional. Hunger reminded monks of Christ's suffering and encouraged reflection on humility and sacrifice. Even the smell of food carried meaning. Simple aromas reinforced the seriousness of the season. Monks also followed strict daily timing connected to sunlight rather than clocks. Because artificial lighting was limited, meals depended on natural daylight. In winter, the main meal might occur shortly after noon, while in summer it could be delayed until later afternoon. The changing schedule meant monks constantly adapted their eating habits to the rhythm of nature. Food and time were inseparable, reinforcing the idea that human life should align with creation rather than personal convenience. Another important aspect of monastic eating was silence. Conversation during meals was usually forbidden. Instead, one monk read aloud from religious writings, biographies of saints, or moral teachings. The reading transformed eating into education. While chewing bread or sipping soup, monks listened to lessons intended to nourish the soul. This practice prevented gossip and ensured that even ordinary activities contributed to spiritual growth. The soundscape of the refectory consisted of quiet footsteps, wooden bowls touching tables, and a calm voice echoing through stone walls. The utensils used during meals were extremely simple. Wooden spoons, clay bowls, and shared serving dishes were common. Metal utensils existed, but were often reserved for wealthier monasteries. Napkins were rare. Monks wiped hands on bread or cloths. Meals emphasized equality. Everyone ate the same food regardless of status within the monastery. Even abbots, who led the community, usually followed the same dietary rules as ordinary monks. This equality reinforced the monastic ideal that humility outweighed hierarchy. Monasteries paid careful attention to storing food for long winters or times of scarcity. Cellars beneath stone buildings remained cool year, round, allowing vegetables and grains to last months without spoiling. Barrels of salted fish lined storage rooms, while smoked meats or fish hung from rafters in regions where limited meat consumption was allowed. Pickled cabbage, fermented vegetables, and preserved fruits ensured survival when fresh harvests disappeared. Preservation was not merely practical. It demonstrated foresight and stewardship, virtues valued in monastic life. Gardens surrounding monasteries were often among the most organized agricultural spaces in medieval Europe. Monks experimented with crop rotation, irrigation, and seed selection long before modern agricultural science. Kitchen gardens grew everyday vegetables close to the refectory for convenience. Separate herb gardens cultivated plants used for flavoring food and treating illness. Some monasteries maintained vineyards and orchards that stretched across hillsides, turning the landscape itself into an extension of the monastery's kitchen. Walking through these gardens was both labor and meditation, blending physical work with spiritual reflection. Food preparation often began hours before eating. Fires needed constant tending, and cooking required patience. Large iron pots simmered slowly, allowing flavors to develop without waste. Bread dough rested overnight before baking, while cheese aged for weeks or months in cool chambers. Brewing beer demanded careful timing and cleanliness. Monks became known for precision and consistency, skills later admired by surrounding communities. Many villagers depended on monasteries for bread during famine years or purchased monastic beer renowned for its quality. Although monks avoided luxury, they did not reject taste entirely. Herbs provided subtle complexity to meals. Sage added warmth to soups, parsley brightened vegetables, and mustard seeds created gentle spice. Garlic and onions appeared frequently, not only for flavor, but also for believed medicinal properties. Medieval people associated strong foods with strength and protection against disease. Monks therefore balanced simplicity with practicality, ensuring meals remained nourishing and satisfying enough to sustain demanding daily routines. Special dietary care existed for the sick. Monastic infirmaries provided modified meals, including softer bread, richer broths, eggs, or occasionally meat. Caring for the ill was considered an act of compassion equal to prayer. The infirmarian monk oversaw both medical treatment and nutrition, believing recovery required appropriate food. Records show that sick monks sometimes received wine, sweetened drinks, or fortified soups, unavailable to the healthy community. Compassion allowed flexibility within otherwise strict dietary discipline. Children or novices living in monasteries often ate slightly differently as well. Younger members required more energy for growth, so allowances could be made for additional food. Education and training occupied much of their day, and meals supported intellectual as well as physical development. Novices learned not only theology, but also cooking, gardening, and food management, ensuring knowledge passed continuously from generation to generation. Feast days dramatically changed the atmosphere of monastic dining. Major celebrations, such as Easter or Christmas, brought brighter decorations to the refectory and richer meals. Fish might be prepared with sauces, breads baked from finer flour, and desserts sweetened with honey or dried fruit served after prayers. Wine flowed more freely, though drunkenness remained forbidden. These celebrations reminded monks that joy and gratitude were central to religious life. The contrast between fasting days and feast days deepened appreciation for both restraint and celebration. Monastic kitchens also interacted with local communities through charity. Monks distributed leftover bread and soup to the poor at monastery gates. During times of famine, monasteries often became centers of relief, feeding travelers, widows, and laborers who lacked resources. Food therefore extended beyond internal consumption. It represented social responsibility. Giving away food reinforced humility, and reminded monks that resources existed for service rather than accumulation. Weather strongly influenced daily meals. A successful harvest meant thicker soups and abundant bread, while poor harvests forced stricter rationing. Unlike nobles who relied on taxation or trade, monasteries depended heavily on their own land. Crop failure directly affected diet, teaching resilience and acceptance of hardship. Written chronicles sometimes mention years when monks survived on little more than barley bread and cabbage, yet continued their prayer routines unchanged. Monastic eating also reflected theological symbolism. Bread represented divine provision, wine symbolized sacred sacrifice, and shared meals mirrored the Last Supper. Every aspect of eating connected earthly existence with spiritual meaning. Even washing hands before meals carried symbolic purification, preparing monks to receive nourishment with gratitude and reverence. Traveling monks experienced different foods when visiting other monasteries, yet hospitality rules ensured consistency. Visitors received meals matching local customs, but within shared monastic principles. This network of hospitality allowed monks to journey across regions without fear of hunger. Monasteries functioned almost like safe havens, connected through shared values and culinary traditions. As centuries passed, some monasteries grew wealthy and faced criticism for relaxing dietary austerity. Historical accounts describe tables occasionally filled with elaborate dishes, imported spices, or excessive quantities of wine. Reform movements periodically arose, seeking a return to earlier simplicity. These reforms emphasized humble eating once again, demonstrating ongoing tension between comfort and spiritual discipline within monastic life. Even the end of the day carried food rituals. After evening prayers, monks sometimes received a small portion of bread or a warm drink before sleep. This final nourishment supported rest after long hours of work and devotion. The monastery gradually fell silent. Kitchens dark except for faint embers glowing beneath iron pots prepared for the next morning. Through centuries of repetition, medieval monks developed one of the most structured dietary systems in history. Their meals were predictable, yet meaningful, modest, yet sustaining. Eating became inseparable from prayer, agriculture, community, and charity. The steady cycle of planting, harvesting, cooking, fasting, and feasting shaped not only physical survival but also identity. The food monks ate every day: bread baked from their own grain, vegetables grown in cloister gardens, fish raised in monastery ponds. The experience of food inside a medieval monastery continued to evolve throughout the centuries, shaped by climate, religious reform, local culture, and the personalities of the communities themselves. While written rules defined what monks were supposed to eat, daily reality depended on harvest success, regional traditions, and the skills of the brothers responsible for the kitchen. Food was never entirely static, even within strict discipline. Adaptation was constant, and monks quietly developed a sophisticated understanding of nutrition long before the concept existed as a science. Zone often overlooked part of monastic eating was the preparation of grains beyond simple bread. Barley and oats were commonly boiled into thick porridges eaten during colder months when physical labor demanded warmth and endurance. These porridges might be enriched with milk, herbs, or crushed nuts when available. Grain dishes were valued because they filled the stomach efficiently and could feed large communities without exhausting resources. Grinding grain itself required enormous effort. Monks operated watermills or windmills attached to monasteries, transforming agriculture into an integrated technological system. The steady sound of turning millstones became part of monastic life, connecting food production directly to daily survival. Monks also relied heavily on legumes, which played a critical role in maintaining strength during long fasting periods. Lentils, chickpeas, and broad beans were soaked overnight to soften them before cooking. These foods stored well, resisted spoilage, and offered reliable nourishment when fresh vegetables were scarce. Recipes were simple but effective. Legumes simmered slowly with onions and herbs, creating dense meals capable of sustaining workers through hours of farming, copying manuscripts, or maintaining buildings. In many monasteries, the repeated appearance of bean-based dishes became so familiar that certain days of the week were informally associated with specific meals. The kitchen environment itself was lively despite the silence maintained during eating. Fires burned continuously, especially in winter, making the kitchen one of the warmest spaces within stone monasteries. Steam rose from boiling pots, smoke drifted upward through roof openings, and cooks moved carefully between hearths carrying wooden ladles and baskets of vegetables. Kitchen monks learned timing through experience rather than written measurement. A soup was ready when its scent filled the room. Bread finished baking when its crust sounded hollow when tapped. Cooking was practical knowledge passed through observation and repetition. Food distribution followed careful organization. The cellarer, an important monastic officer, managed storage and rationing. He monitored supplies of grain, wine, cheese, and preserved foods, ensuring fairness and preventing waste. Monastic communities could include dozens or even hundreds of members, so precise planning was essential. Records were sometimes kept noting how much bread each monk received, how many barrels of ale remained, and how long winter provisions might last. The cellarer's role required both spiritual integrity and administrative skill, demonstrating how deeply food management connected with monastic governance. Monks often experienced hunger more frequently than modern people might expect. Even outside official fasts, portions were intentionally moderate. Overeating was discouraged because physical heaviness was believed to lead to spiritual laziness. Some monks wrote about moments when the smell of baking bread tested their discipline, revealing that desire for food remained a human struggle, even within religious communities. These internal battles were seen as opportunities for spiritual growth rather than failures. Traveling pilgrims who stayed at monasteries frequently described monastic meals in their writings. Many visitors were surprised by the regularity of food service. While peasants might face unpredictable access to meals, monks rarely skipped eating altogether. The stability of monastery agriculture meant that even simple food appeared consistently. For travelers exhausted from long journeys, a bowl of warm pottage and fresh bread offered profound comfort. These acts of hospitality enhanced the reputation of monasteries as safe resting places across medieval Europe. Another essential feature of monastic diet was the use of oils and fats. In northern regions, butter or animal fat appeared occasionally, while Mediterranean monasteries relied more heavily on olive oil. Oils enriched vegetables, preserved foods, and added calories necessary for survival. However, fats were used carefully to avoid indulgence. recipes aimed for nourishment rather than richness, balancing practicality with spiritual restraint. During harvest seasons, monks sometimes ate more abundantly, simply because fresh food surrounded them. Fields produced greens, beans, and grains simultaneously, and kitchens incorporated newly gathered ingredients immediately. Summer meals might include fresh salads of herbs and vegetables, dressed lightly with oil or vinegar. These brighter meals contrasted with winter diets dominated by stored foods, reminding monks of the cyclical generosity of nature. The act of growing food influenced monastic spirituality deeply. Working in gardens allowed monks to reflect on patience, growth, and dependence on seasons beyond human control. Planting seeds symbolized faith. Harvest represented divine reward. Many monastic writings compare spiritual development to cultivation, using agricultural imagery drawn directly from daily food production. Thus, eating vegetables grown by one's own labor reinforced lessons about humility and gratitude. Monks also developed sophisticated baking traditions. Some monasteries produced multiple bread types: coarse loaves for everyday consumption, finer loaves for feast days, and special breads reserved for liturgical use. Baking days were communal events, with ovens heated intensely and batches prepared for several days at once. The smell of bread marked time within the monastery as clearly as ringing bells. Fermented foods played an important but subtle role. Cabbage and other vegetables were sometimes fermented to extend preservation, improving digestion and providing nutritional variety during winter months. Beer brewing, too, involved fermentation knowledge refined over generations. Monastic breweries became highly respected, and some evolved into famous brewing traditions still recognized today. Beer was safer than untreated water and supplied calories needed for physical labor, where the hardships occasionally forced monasteries into extreme simplicity. Historical accounts mention years when monks survived on thin gruel made from barley or oats when harvests failed. During such times, spiritual writings emphasized endurance and communal solidarity. Sharing scarcity strengthened bonds within the community. Even when food became monotonous, the rituals surrounding meals remained unchanged, providing emotional stability during uncertainty. Monastic dining also reinforced social equality. Noble-born monks who entered religious life left behind aristocratic privileges. They ate the same bread, drank the same ale, and followed the same restrictions as brothers from humble backgrounds. The shared table erased worldly status differences, creating a rare environment in medieval society where hierarchy diminished during meals. Nighttime eating was minimal. After evening prayer, heavy meals were avoided to maintain alertness during late religious offices. A small portion of bread or a warm drink might be allowed, but restraint remained the guiding principle. Sleep followed quickly afterward, preparing monks for another pre-dawn awakening. Over centuries, monasteries influenced surrounding culinary culture. Farmers adopted agricultural techniques learned from monks, and villagers copied recipes or preservation methods observed within monastery kitchens. Monastic self-sufficiency quietly shaped regional food traditions, spreading knowledge of brewing, cheese, making, gardening, and baking far beyond cloister walls. The psychological dimension of monastic eating is equally important. Modern dining often emphasizes choice and pleasure, but medieval monks experienced food as rhythm and responsibility. Meals anchored the day, dividing hours of prayer, labor, study, and rest. Predictability reduced distraction, allowing monks to focus inwardly. The steady repetition of similar meals created a calm environment where expectations were clear and anxiety reduced. Food also carried moral symbolism. Wastefulness was condemned because every ingredient represented labor and divine provision. Leftover bread might be dried for later use. Vegetable scraps became broth. Spoiled food was rare due to careful management. This culture of respect for resources fostered sustainability long before environmental awareness became a modern concern. Monks occasionally expressed joy in small culinary details. The first apples of autumn, fresh honey collected from hives, or newly brewed ale tasted after weeks of waiting. These moments of pleasure were not forbidden but framed as gratitude rather than indulgence. Appreciation without excess became the ideal balance. As evening darkness settled over monastery courtyards, kitchens quieted once again, fires were reduced to glowing embers, tools cleaned and hung neatly, and storage rooms secured. Tomorrow's meals already depended on work completed today. Grain harvested, vegetables planted, beer fermenting slowly in barrels. The cycle never stopped. Eating was not an isolated event, but part of an ongoing system linking soil, labor, faith, and community. In the end, what medieval monks ate every day reveals more than historical menus. Their diet reflects a worldview centered on discipline and cooperation. Life inside a medieval monastery continued to revolve around food in ways both practical and symbolic, extending far beyond the simple act of eating. Every stage of nourishment, from planting seeds to clearing wooden bowls after supper, formed part of a disciplined spiritual routine repeated, day after day for years, sometimes for an entire lifetime. For monks, food was never separate from faith, labor, or time itself. The steady rhythm of meals created stability in a world often filled with uncertainty, war, famine, and disease outside monastery walls. Before food ever reached the refectory, enormous preparation took place across monastery lands. Fields surrounding the cloister were carefully organized into sections for grains, vegetables, orchards, and grazing animals. Monks believed work itself was prayer, so farming carried sacred meaning. Rising after early prayers, groups of brothers walked silently into fields, carrying wooden tools, tending soil that would later sustain their community. The connection between labor and eating was direct and deeply understood. Every loaf of bread represented months of effort, ploughing, sowing, harvesting, threshing, grinding, kneading, and baking. Monastic granaries were among the most important buildings in a monastery complex. Grain stored safely meant survival through winter. These structures were raised above ground or carefully ventilated to prevent dampness and rodents. The responsibility of guarding grain supplies was taken seriously, because even a small loss could threaten the entire community. Some monasteries developed early accounting systems, recording harvest yields and consumption patterns to ensure careful management throughout the year. Inside the kitchen, food preparation followed a predictable hierarchy. Senior monks supervised while appointed cooks handled daily tasks. Cooking was considered both service and humility training. A monk assigned to kitchen duty temporarily left scholarly or administrative roles to perform manual work such as chopping vegetables, hauling water, cleaning hearths or washing utensils. This rotation reminded all members that no task was beneath anyone dedicated to communal life. Water collection formed another essential part of daily food preparation. Monasteries often built sophisticated water systems, including wells, aqueducts or channels diverted from nearby streams. Clean water supported cooking, brewing, gardening, and hygiene. In some monasteries, running water even flowed through cloisters, symbolizing purification and renewal. The presence of reliable water sources helped monasteries maintain healthier living conditions than many medieval towns. Cooking techniques emphasized patience rather than complexity. Most foods were boiled, stewed, or baked. Frying required large quantities of fat and was therefore less common. Slow cooking softened tough vegetables and grains while conserving fuel. Large cauldrons allowed meals to be prepared efficiently for dozens of monks at once. The communal nature of cooking reinforced equality. Individual portions mattered less than collective nourishment. Spices existed but were used sparingly. Expensive imports like pepper, cinnamon, or cloves occasionally reached wealthy monasteries through trade networks. Yet everyday flavor relied on local herbs. Monks cultivated extensive herb gardens, not only for cooking, but also for healing. Rosemary, sage, mint, and thyme flavored meals gently without encouraging indulgence. These herbs also masked bitterness in preserved foods stored for long periods. During long winters, meals grew repetitive. Monks might eat variations of the same dishes for weeks. Bread, beans, cabbage, and preserved fish appearing again and again. Yet repetition was intentional. Predictable meals reduced distraction and encouraged gratitude for consistency rather than novelty. Medieval spiritual writings sometimes praised monotony because it freed the mind from constant desire. Fasting seasons intensified this simplicity. On strict fasting days, monks avoided rich foods entirely. Oil replaced butter, and meals shrank in size. Hunger became part of daily meditation. Monks reflected on human dependence and vulnerability, using bodily discomfort as a reminder of spiritual purpose. Unlike modern dieting motivated by appearance or health trends, monastic fasting focused on humility and self-discipline. The refectory itself played an important role in shaping the eating experience. Long wooden tables stretched across stone halls illuminated by narrow windows or candlelight. Walls were often decorated with religious images, reminding monks of sacred teachings even while eating. Seating arrangements followed order but avoided privilege. Everyone faced inward toward the community rather than outward towards status or wealth. Before meals began, monks recited prayers, thanking God for sustenance. After eating, another prayer expressed gratitude and asked forgiveness for any excess. Even cleaning up became ritualized. Bowls were stacked carefully, crumbs gathered so nothing was wasted, and leftovers prepared for redistribution. Food discipline extended beyond consumption into stewardship. Monks rarely ate alone. Communal dining reinforced unity and accountability. A brother who took too much food or ate carelessly risked correction from superiors. The goal was balance. Neither deprivation that harmed health nor indulgence that weakened discipline. Moderation served as the guiding principle behind every meal. Animals within monastery grounds contributed significantly to daily diet. Chickens supplied eggs, sheep provided milk and wool, and cattle assisted with ploughing as well as dairy production. Monks cared for animals with practical respect, understanding their survival depended on responsible stewardship. Livestock manure fertilized gardens, creating a sustainable agricultural cycle linking animals, crops, and food supply. Fishing required equal attention. Many monasteries constructed elaborate pond systems designed not only for food, but also for water management. Fish breeding became a specialized skill, ensuring constant availability during fasting periods. Some monasteries even traded surplus fish with nearby villages, strengthening economic ties and spreading monastic influence beyond religious life. Food also played a role in education. Younger monks learned arithmetic through measuring grain or calculating storage needs. Literacy training sometimes involved copying agricultural or culinary instructions. Thus, eating habits indirectly supported intellectual development, blending practical knowledge with scholarship during illness outbreaks common in medieval times. Diet became crucial. Herbal broths, diluted wine, and soft breads were prepared to aid recovery. Monastic infirmaries served as early healthcare centers, and nutrition formed a key part of treatment. Records suggest monks recognized connections between food, strength, and healing long before modern medicine confirmed such relationships. Silence during meals created a distinctive psychological environment. Without conversation, monks became more aware of textures, smells, and sounds. The crunch of crust, the warmth of soup, or the scent of herbs gained heightened significance. Eating slowly encouraged mindfulness, turning nourishment into a form of contemplation. Modern observers might describe this as an early practice of mindful eating. Despite strict rules, humor and humanity still existed around food. Chronicles occasionally mention monks joking quietly during kitchen duties or celebrating unexpectedly successful harvests. Food could lift morale after difficult seasons or heavy workloads. Shared meals strengthened emotional bonds within communities that depended entirely on cooperation. Over centuries, some monasteries accumulated culinary reputations. Pilgrims traveled specifically to taste monastic bread, cheese, or ale. Monks rarely sought fame, yet their commitment to consistency and quality produced respected traditions. These culinary legacies survived even after many monasteries declined, influencing regional cuisines across Europe. Night fell early within monastery walls. After evening prayer, darkness settled over gardens and courtyards. Kitchens cooled, and storage rooms stood ready for another day's cycle. Monks retired, knowing tomorrow's meals depended on both divine providence and their own labor. The predictability of food offered reassurance in an unpredictable world. Ultimately, the everyday diet of medieval monks reveals a remarkable balance between necessity and meaning. Meals were simple but sufficient, repetitive yet comforting, humble yet carefully prepared. Food connected body, community, environment, and spirituality into a unified system of living. Each loaf baked, each vegetable harvested, and each bowl shared represented not only survival, but devotion. Through centuries of quiet repetition, medieval monks demonstrated that eating could become more than consumption. It could be discipline, gratitude, cooperation, and reflection woven into daily life. Their meals, though modest by modern standards, sustained intellectual centers, preserved knowledge, supported charity, and nurtured communities dedicated to contemplation. In the steady rhythm of bread, soup, fish, and prayer, medieval monastic life found both nourishment and purpose, proving that even the simplest food, prepared with intention and shared in harmony, could shape an entire civilization's understanding of balance between body and soul. As monastic communities matured over centuries, food continued to shape nearly every dimension of daily existence, influencing not only physical survival, but also emotional stability and spiritual identity. The predictability of meals provided a structure that guided monks through time itself. Bells rang to signal prayer, work, and eating, creating a rhythm where hunger and satisfaction aligned with sacred observance rather than personal impulse. This disciplined timing gradually trained monks to detach from desire, learning to eat when called rather than when appetite demanded. Early morning hunger was common. After long hours of night prayer, many monks worked in cold conditions before their first meal. The body adapted slowly to this routine, and seasoned monks often described how the sensation of hunger became quieter over time. Instead of resisting it, they learned to observe it calmly. This relationship with food fostered patience and endurance, qualities considered essential for spiritual growth. Eating thus became an answer to labor and prayer, rather than entertainment or distraction. The agricultural calendar determined the emotional atmosphere of monastic meals. Spring brought fresh greens after months of preserved food, creating subtle excitement within communities accustomed to winter monotony. Young vegetables such as spinach, sorrel, and tender onions appeared in soups, offering brighter flavors and renewed energy. Summer expanded the variety further, filling tables with beans, peas, herbs, and fruit. Autumn was the most satisfying season, marked by harvest abundance, fresh bread from newly milled grain, apples gathered from orchards, and thicker stews prepared as temperatures cooled. Winter returned monks to simplicity, reinforcing acceptance of natural cycles. Food storage required remarkable ingenuity. Root cellars preserved carrots, turnips, and onions buried in sand to maintain freshness. Apples were carefully arranged on wooden racks, so air circulated around them, preventing rot. Grain sacks were inspected regularly for moisture or pests. The act of preservation was continuous vigilance. Neglect could mean starvation months later. Monks therefore developed habits of observation and foresight, checking supplies almost as frequently as they attended prayer. Cooking fires served as social centers during preparation hours, even though formal silence governed the refectory. Monks assigned to kitchen duty worked side by side, exchanging brief necessary instructions in low voices. These moments allowed limited human interaction, otherwise absent from much of monastic routine. Shared labor around food fostered quiet companionship, strengthening bonds without breaking discipline. Another aspect often overlooked is how monasteries adapted food to climate emergencies. Floods, droughts, or harsh winters sometimes destroyed crops, forcing communities to rely on stored legumes or emergency grain reserves. During such crises, meals grew smaller and simpler, yet monasteries frequently continued offering charity to the poor outside their walls. This commitment sometimes placed monks at risk themselves, illustrating how food represented moral responsibility as much as survival. Monastic diets also shaped physical health in distinctive ways. High consumption of vegetables, grains, and moderate portions often protected monks from certain diseases linked to excessive meat consumption common among nobility. However, repetitive diets occasionally led to nutritional deficiencies, especially during prolonged fasting periods. Medieval physicians connected to monasteries attempted to balance these effects through herbal tonics and carefully prepared broths designed to restore strength. The psychological comfort of routine meals cannot be overstated. For individuals who entered monasteries after experiencing unstable or violent medieval society, predictable food offered emotional security. Knowing that bread would be baked and soup prepared each day created a sense of peace rare outside cloistered life. Many monks describe dining together as one of the strongest expressions of communal belonging. Even table arrangement reflected symbolic order. Senior monks often sat according to years of service, while novices occupied places where they could observe proper behavior. Watching how experienced monks ate, slowly, quietly, gratefully, formed part of spiritual education. Every gesture mattered, how bread was broken, how bowls were held, how attention remained focused on scripture readings rather than taste alone. Lighting influenced the experience of meals as well. During darker months, candles illuminated the refectory with soft flickering light reflecting off stone walls. Shadows moved gently as monks ate, creating an atmosphere of calm introspection. Meals rarely felt hurried. The absence of loud conversation allowed monks to notice small sensory details. The warmth of food against cold air, the scent of herbs rising from bowls, the sound of pages turning as scripture was read aloud. Food preparation also encouraged innovation born from necessity. When certain crops failed, monks experimented with substitutes, blending grains or developing new preservation methods. Some monasteries became early centers of culinary experimentation, not for luxury but survival. Over generations, these adaptations created regional food traditions that influenced surrounding populations long after monasteries themselves declined. Festive meals carried deep emotional meaning precisely because they were rare. After weeks of fasting, the arrival of a feast day transformed the refectory. Extra candles were lit, tables decorated more carefully, and meals extended slightly longer than usual. The addition of sweetened bread, richer cheese, or spiced dishes felt extraordinary. Joy expressed through food reminded monks that celebration and gratitude were essential parts of spiritual life, balancing austerity with hope. Monks travelling between monasteries encountered subtle differences in diet that reflected local ecosystems. Coastal communities relied heavily on seafood, while inland monasteries emphasized grains and dairy. Yet visiting monks always recognized familiar patterns: communal bread, vegetable stews, modest portions, and silent dining accompanied by sacred reading. These shared customs created a cultural unity across vast distances. Food also played a role in intellectual productivity. Monasteries famous for scholarship depended on reliable nutrition to sustain long hours of manuscript copying and study. Simple but steady meals supported concentration. Heavy or overly rich food was believed to dull the mind reinforcing dietary moderation among scholars dedicated to preserving knowledge. Monastic brewing and baking gradually influenced medieval economies. Surplus beer, wine, cheese, or bread produced by monasteries was sometimes sold or traded, generating income used to support charity, maintain buildings, or fund manuscript production. Thus, everyday food practices contributed indirectly to education, art, and social welfare throughout medieval Europe. Nightfall marked a final transition in the daily relationship with food. After evening prayers, monks prepared for rest without indulgence. Hunger was allowed to remain faintly present, encouraging discipline even during sleep. The next day would begin again before dawn, repeating the cycle of prayer, labor, and nourishment unchanged. Through decades of repetition, monks developed an intimate awareness of food's deeper meaning. Eating was not separated from ethics, ecology, or spirituality. Each meal connected soil to soul, labor to gratitude, and individual existence to communal purpose. In a society often defined by hierarchy and scarcity, monasteries demonstrated an alternative model where shared resources, careful stewardship, and mindful consumption sustained entire communities. What medieval monks ate every day, therefore, tells a story far richer than a list of ingredients. Their meals embodied patience learned through agriculture, humility practiced through moderation, and unity strengthened through shared experience. Bread, soup, fish, cheese, fruit, and simple drink formed the visible surface of a much larger philosophy, one that treated nourishment as an act of devotion woven seamlessly into the rhythm of human life. As centuries passed, the daily experience of food within medieval monasteries continued to deepen into something that shaped identity itself. For many monks, eating was one of the few moments when the entire community gathered in one place at the same time outside of church services. The refectory, therefore, functioned almost like the heartbeat of monastic life. Every day, regardless of weather, political turmoil, or personal struggles, monks walked together toward the same tables, sat in familiar places, and received the same nourishment. This repetition created continuity across generations. A monk entering the monastery at 20 years old would often eat nearly identical meals decades later, prepared according to traditions older than himself. Food preparation began not only with agriculture, but also with planning for future years. Monasteries often thought in long time scales. Fruit trees planted by one generation would not fully mature until another generation of monks inherited them. Vineyards required patience measured in decades. Even cheese aging demanded long waiting periods. This long-term relationship with food taught monks to think beyond individual lifespan, encouraging humility and responsibility toward future brothers. They would never meet. Daily meals were influenced by weather patterns in ways modern societies rarely experience. Heavy rain might delay harvests, leading to thinner soups weeks later. A mild summer produced sweeter fruit, subtly improving morale. Harsh winters meant harder bread and fewer vegetables. Over long stretches of medieval history, the daily experience of eating within monasteries became so deeply embedded in routine that food almost disappeared into the background of consciousness, yet at the same time it quietly shaped how monks understood existence itself. A monk might spend 40 or 50 years within the same monastery, eating variations of the same meals prepared in nearly identical ways. This constancy produced a unique psychological environment. While the outside world changed through wars, rulers, plagues, and shifting economies, monastic dining remained steady. The bowl placed before a monk each day represented continuity stronger than political power or personal ambition. Morning preparation for food began while much of the world still slept. After early prayers, monks assigned to kitchen work checked stored supplies in near darkness, sometimes carrying small oil lamps through stone corridors. Grain bins were opened carefully, vegetables sorted, and water drawn from wells or channels. The quiet labor before sunrise established the tone for the entire day. Cooking was not rushed, patience governed every action. Fires had to be built gradually so that heat remained stable for hours. Too much flame wasted precious fuel, while too little left food undercooked. Experience rather than measurement guided these decisions. Bread dough often rested overnight beneath cloth coverings, slowly rising in cool rooms. When bakers returned at dawn, they shaped loaves by hand, each slightly different from the next. These loaves carried fingerprints of the monk who prepared them, creating an unspoken connection between laborer and community. When bread finally emerged from ovens, its warmth contrasted sharply with the cold air of stone monasteries, offering physical comfort as well as nourishment. Monastic meals also reflected the passing of liturgical seasons. Religious calendars determined not only prayer themes but also dietary adjustments. Certain weeks demanded stricter fasting, others allowed modest relaxation. Over time, monks internalized these rhythms so deeply that their sense of time became inseparable from food. A monk could often identify the season, not by date, but by what appeared in his bowl. Lighter soup signaling fasting periods, richer pottage announcing celebrations approaching. The emotional relationship with food matured gradually. New monks sometimes struggled with reduced variety and smaller portions compared to life outside. Yet older monks frequently described a transformation in perception. As desires quieted, simple meals began to feel sufficient and even comforting. Satisfaction came less from flavor and more from participation in shared discipline. Eating ceased to be about preference and became an expression of belonging. Monasteries also cultivated remarkable awareness of sustainability. Every scrap of organic waste returned to the soil as compost or animal feed. Gardens thrived because nothing was discarded carelessly. Monks observed how leftovers nourished future crops, reinforcing an understanding of cyclical life long before environmental philosophy emerged as a formal concept. The monastery functioned as a closed ecosystem where food production and consumption existed in careful balance winter evenings. Especially highlighted the emotional importance of meals. Darkness arrived early, and cold winds surrounded monastery walls. After long hours of labor and prayer, monks gathered in candlelit refectories where warm soup provided relief from physical hardship. Steam rising from bowls blurred candlelight, creating an atmosphere of quiet shelter. These moments fostered deep communal bonds, even without conversation. Shared warmth and nourishment strengthened solidarity among brothers, living far from worldly comforts. The act of serving food carried symbolic meaning as well. Monks took turns distributing portions, moving slowly along tables with ladles and baskets. Serving others before serving oneself reinforced humility. The server's role reminded the community that leadership meant service rather than authority. Even abbots occasionally participated, demonstrating that nourishment belonged equally to all. Monastic diet also influenced sleep patterns. Moderate evening meals prevented heaviness that might interrupt night prayers. Monks often rose again during the night for additional worship, so balanced nutrition supported sustained alertness. Over time, the body adapted to this unusual schedule, aligning hunger, rest, and spiritual duty into a unified rhythm unfamiliar to modern lifestyles. Food preparation fostered creativity within limits. Without access to abundant spices or luxury ingredients, monks experimented subtly with texture and combination. Grains might be toasted before boiling to deepen flavor. Herbs added at different cooking stages changed aroma. These small innovations provided variation without violating principles of simplicity. Culinary skill became an expression of care for the community, rather than self-expression. Festivals introduced moments of collective joy that stood out vividly against ordinary days. When feast days arrived, monks noticed even minor improvements. A slightly sweeter bread, thicker cheese slices, or fruit preserved with honey. These enhancements felt meaningful precisely because they were rare. Celebration gained depth through contrast with restraint, teaching appreciation rather than expectation. Monastic hospitality continued to influence eating habits. Travelers, pilgrims, and scholars arriving at monastery gates were welcomed with food regardless of status. Feeding strangers reinforced the belief that every guest represented divine presence. Kitchens therefore maintained readiness to expand meals unexpectedly, demonstrating flexibility within structured routine. Monks also learned to recognize individual needs quietly. Older brothers received softer foods easier to chew, while laborers working fields might be given slightly larger portions. Though equality remained central, compassion allowed adjustments ensuring health and dignity. This balance between uniformity and care reflected mature communal ethics. Over decades, certain sensory memories became inseparable from monastic identity. The smell of damp earth in vegetable gardens, the sound of knives chopping roots on wooden boards, the taste of fresh bread after fasting, the warmth of ale after winter labor. These repeated experiences shaped how monks remembered their lives. Personal milestones were often associated not with dramatic events, but with seasons of harvest, years of abundance, or winters endured together. Food scarcity during times of plague or conflict tested monastic resilience. Chronicles describe monks continuing communal meals even when numbers diminished due to illness. Maintaining the dining ritual preserved morale and continuity. Eating together affirmed life amid uncertainty, reinforcing hope when external circumstances seemed unstable. Monasteries also influenced surrounding villages by modeling organized agriculture and responsible consumption. Farmers observed monastic crop rotation, storage techniques, and brewing practices, gradually adopting similar methods. Thus, everyday monastic meals indirectly improved regional food security and agricultural knowledge across medieval Europe. The spiritual symbolism of food deepened with experience. Bread represented divine sustenance, wine symbolized sacred mystery, and shared meals echoed biblical teachings of fellowship. Monks learned to see nourishment not as personal possession, but as gift received and shared. Gratitude became habitual, expressed through prayer before and after eating. As years turned into decades, many monks came to understand that simplicity itself provided freedom. Without constant decision making about food, mental energy shifted toward contemplation, study, and service. The absence of culinary excess reduced distraction, allowing attention to settle inwardly. What might appear restrictive from a modern perspective often felt liberating within monastic context. At night, after kitchens quieted and fires dimmed, the monastery rested, knowing that tomorrow's meals depended on ongoing cooperation between land, labor, and faith. Seeds already planted would become future bread. Fermenting barrels promised future drink. Stored vegetables guaranteed survival through coming seasons. Food linked past effort to future hope in an unbroken chain. In this way, what medieval monks ate every day formed far more than a diet. It created a complete system of living, where nourishment supported discipline, community replaced individual desire, and ordinary meals became acts of devotion repeated across centuries. Through bread baked patiently, vegetables grown carefully, fish prepared according to sacred observance, and drink shared in moderation, monks transformed eating into a steady practice of balance between body and spirit. Their daily meals reveal how simplicity, when guided by intention and shared purpose, can sustain not only human life, but an enduring vision of harmony between nature, community, and faith. As monastic traditions continued across generations, the meaning of food grew even deeper, shaping how monks perceived time, aging, and personal transformation. A monk who entered the monastery as a young novice gradually experienced decades, marked not by dramatic life events, but by recurring cycles of planting, cooking, fasting, and eating. Meals became milestones through which memory formed. Rather than recalling years by political events or personal achievements, many monks remembered seasons through harvest abundance, harsh winters survived on simple fare, or feast days shared with brothers who might no longer be alive. The physical act of eating connected monks intimately with the land surrounding their monastery. Unlike nobles who consumed food produced by distant labourers, monks usually ate what they themselves cultivated. The soil beneath their feet determined their diet directly. A dry summer reduced vegetable harvests. A successful grain season meant fuller bread baskets. This dependence encouraged attentiveness to weather patterns, soil conditions, and agricultural rhythms. Over time, monks developed profound ecological awareness grounded entirely in survival and gratitude rather than theory. The preparation of vegetables illustrated this connection vividly. Root vegetables pulled from cold earth were cleaned carefully in outdoor washing areas before entering kitchens. Monks trimmed leaves, sorted damaged pieces for animal feed, and saved seeds for future planting. Each vegetable carried evidence of patient care, extending months into the past. Eating such food reinforced awareness that nourishment emerged from cooperation between human effort and natural processes beyond control. Within the monastery, food also influenced social harmony. Because monks shared identical meals regardless of background, economic differences disappeared during dining. A former nobleman and a former peasant sat side by side eating the same bread and soup. This equality was rare in medieval society and helped dissolve pride tied to wealth or birth. The shared table symbolized a spiritual family where identity depended on commitment rather than status. Monastic meals often unfolded slowly, allowing digestion and reflection to occur simultaneously. Without conversation, monks became aware of subtle bodily sensations, warmth spreading after soup, fatigue easing after bread, or renewed energy following nourishment. This heightened awareness cultivated an early form of bodily mindfulness. Monks learned to recognize the difference between true hunger and desire, adjusting their habits accordingly. Food preparation required cooperation across many roles. Gardeners harvested produce, millers ground grain, bakers prepared bread, cooks assembled meals, and cellarers managed storage. Each task supported the others, forming a complex system sustained through trust and coordination. A failure in one area affected everyone. This interdependence reinforced humility, reminding monks that personal survival relied on collective effort. During long fasting periods, monks experienced altered relationships with taste. When richer foods returned after fasting, flavors seemed unusually vivid. A simple apple or piece of cheese could feel intensely satisfying. Fasting therefore sharpened appreciation rather than eliminating pleasure entirely. Monastic spirituality sought not to destroy enjoyment, but to free it from excess and dependence. Monasteries also served as places where culinary knowledge accumulated over centuries. Recipes were rarely written formally, yet techniques passed from one generation to the next through demonstration. Young monks observed elders preparing food, learning subtle adjustments impossible to describe in words. This oral and practical tradition preserved culinary continuity, even when written records were scarce. Another important element of monastic eating was adaptability during travel or missionary work. Monks sent to establish new monasteries carried knowledge of agriculture and cooking with them. Upon arriving in unfamiliar regions, they studied local crops and climates, modifying their diet accordingly while preserving core principles of simplicity and moderation. This adaptability helped monastic culture spread widely across Europe. The emotional significance of shared meals became especially evident during times of loss. When a monk died, the community gathered for memorial meals, where food symbolized continuity of life and faith. Eating together after mourning reinforced communal resilience, reminding surviving members that daily routines, including meals, would continue despite personal grief. Monks also recognized the importance of rest in relation to food. Heavy labor days required slightly larger portions, while periods devoted to study allowed lighter meals. Although strict rules existed, experienced abbots adjusted practices to maintain health and productivity. This balance demonstrated practical wisdom. Discipline guided life, but compassion preserved well-being. The monastery garden remained central to daily nourishment. Walking through rows of herbs and vegetables offered moments of quiet reflection separate from formal prayer. Monks often described gardening as conversation with creation itself. The smell of soil, the growth of plants, and the anticipation of harvest linked physical labor with spiritual contemplation. Food grown through such attention carried emotional meaning beyond nutrition. Seasonal preservation became an annual ritual. Late summer and autumn brought intense activity as monks prepared for winter scarcity. Fruits were dried, vegetables stored, and grains sealed in protective containers. Kitchens filled with movement, as brothers worked long hours ensuring survival during colder months. These preservation efforts fostered foresight and patience, teaching monks to live responsibly in the present for the sake of future security. The refectory environment shaped behavior subtly. Sitting upright, eating slowly, and listening attentively trained monks in discipline extending beyond meals. Dining etiquette mirrored broader monastic virtues: order, humility, attentiveness, and gratitude. Over time, these habits influenced personality itself, embedding calmness and restraint into daily conduct. Food also connected monasteries to wider society through trade and charity. Surplus wine, cheese, or grain sometimes supported surrounding villages during hardship. Conversely, local communities occasionally supplied monasteries with goods unavailable on monastery lands. This exchange created mutual dependence, integrating monastic life into regional economies while maintaining spiritual independence. Monastic brewing deserves special attention because it demonstrated early scientific observation. Monitoring fermentation required awareness of temperature, timing, and cleanliness. Monks refined brewing methods carefully, learning from experience when batches succeeded or failed. These practices contributed to technological knowledge preserved and transmitted through generations. Even simple utensils carried meaning. Wooden bowls worn smooth by years of use reflected continuity between past and present monks. A novice might inherit a spoon used by many predecessors, symbolizing entry into an enduring tradition. Objects associated with food thus became carriers of memory and identity. As monks aged, dietary needs changed, and communities responded with quiet care. Elderly monks received softer foods, warmer drinks, or additional nourishment. When strength declined, supporting aging members reinforced communal compassion and acknowledged that monastic life was a lifelong journey sustained through mutual care. Nightfall concluded the day's relationship with food, yet preparation for tomorrow already began. Bakers planned dough, gardeners anticipated morning harvest, and cellarers reviewed supplies. The monastery rested within a continuous cycle where nourishment linked past labor with future survival. Ultimately, the everyday diet of medieval monks reveals a civilization built on rhythm rather than abundance. Their meals expressed a philosophy where enough was considered sufficient, where gratitude replaced excess, and where shared nourishment strengthened both body and community. Bread, vegetables, fish, fruit, cheese, and modest drink formed the visible structure of life guided by deeper values. Patience learned from agriculture, humility practiced through moderation, and unity expressed through communal dining. Through centuries of repetition, monks demonstrated that food could become more than sustenance. It could teach discipline without harshness, satisfaction without luxury, and connection without words. In the quiet refectories of medieval monasteries, ordinary meals nourished not only individuals, but an enduring vision of human life lived in balance with nature, community, and spiritual purpose. Over many generations, the rhythm of eating within medieval monasteries gradually shaped an entire culture of awareness that extended into every corner of daily existence. Food was never isolated from the wider structure of monastic life. Instead, it functioned as a thread connecting prayer, labor, rest, learning, and community. A monk's understanding of himself often developed through these repeated experiences at the table. where physical nourishment quietly reinforced spiritual commitment. As dawn approached each day, the anticipation of food was not driven by craving, but by readiness. After long periods of prayer and silence, monks arrived at their meals already mentally prepared. Hunger had accumulated naturally through work and devotion, and this created an appreciation for even the simplest dish. The first spoonful of warm pottage or the breaking of fresh bread symbolized completion of morning effort. Eating became both reward and renewal, allowing monks to continue their duties with renewed strength. Monastic agriculture demanded long-term observation of nature. Monks carefully noted how rainfall affected grain quality, how frost changed vegetable flavor, or how soil responded to repeated planting. Over time, they built practical agricultural knowledge based entirely on experience. This wisdom influenced what appeared daily in monastery kitchens. Certain crops were favored not because of taste alone, but because they proved reliable across difficult seasons. Stability mattered more than variety. In many monasteries, the kitchen was positioned strategically near gardens and storage rooms, minimizing unnecessary movement and preserving efficiency. Paths worn into the ground connected fields, wells, granaries, and cooking spaces, reflecting centuries of repeated use. These physical routes mirrored the habitual flow of food production itself, emphasizing continuity between land and table. Food preparation also reinforced patience. Many dishes required long simmering over slow fires, encouraging cooks to work steadily rather than hurriedly. Monks learned that nourishment could not be rushed. Waiting for bread to rise or cheese to mature mirrored spiritual teachings about growth requiring time and persistence. The kitchen therefore became a place where practical tasks carried symbolic meaning. Another dimension of monastic eating involved restraint, not only in quantity, but in sensory stimulation. Meals were intentionally plain so that monks would not become attached to pleasure. Yet this simplicity often heightened appreciation for subtle flavors. A touch of fresh herbs, slightly sweeter fruit, or newly baked bread felt deeply satisfying, precisely because excess was absent. Monks trained themselves to notice small blessings rather than seek constant novelty. The refectory environment strengthened concentration. Listening to scripture while eating required attention divided between body and mind, reinforcing balance between physical needs and spiritual reflection. The reader's voice guided communal awareness, ensuring that even nourishment served intellectual and devotional purposes. Over years, monks associated the act of eating with learning, making meals an extension of education. Food also shaped relationships between monasteries and surrounding landscapes. Monastic communities often improved previously uncultivated land, draining marshes, clearing forests carefully, and introducing organized farming systems. The resulting productivity allowed monasteries to sustain themselves, while also assisting nearby villages. Thus, everyday monastic meals depended on environmental transformation achieved through disciplined labor. Seasonal scarcity tested communal resilience. During years of poor harvest, monks reduced portions collectively rather than allowing unequal distribution. Shared sacrifice strengthened unity and prevented resentment. Chronicles sometimes describe monks voluntarily choosing stricter fasting when neighboring populations suffered famine, expressing solidarity with those beyond monastery walls. The emotional tone surrounding meals varied subtly throughout the year. Spring meals carried quiet optimism as fresh greens returned. Summer dining reflected abundance and physical energy after long workdays. Autumn meals felt satisfying and secure, filled with preserved foods prepared for winter. Winter meals emphasized endurance and reflection, consumed slowly in dim candlelight, while cold winds pressed against stone buildings. Monastic brewing and wine-making added another layer to daily nourishment. These crafts required careful monitoring and long waiting periods, reinforcing lessons about transformation occurring gradually and invisibly. Fermentation symbolized change guided by patience rather than force. Monks observed these processes closely, developing practical scientific awareness rooted in observation rather than theory. Hospitality continued to influence the monastic table. Guests arriving unexpectedly were offered food even when supplies were limited. This willingness to share reflected a belief that generosity strengthened spiritual life. Monks sometimes reduced their own portions, so visitors could eat fully, demonstrating values of service embedded directly into food culture. The experience of aging within monasteries revealed another aspect of daily diet. Older monks who had eaten the same foods for decades often found comfort in familiar tastes. Meals became anchors of memory, connecting present experience with years of shared life. Younger monks inherited traditions not only through instruction but through participation in identical routines repeated across generations. Food preparation also cultivated humility through manual labor. Scholars, administrators, and senior monks periodically returned to kitchen duties, reminding everyone that intellectual achievement did not exempt anyone from communal responsibility. Washing vegetables or stirring soup reinforced equality within the community. Monastic kitchens functioned as centers of quiet efficiency. Tools were maintained carefully, fires managed responsibly, and ingredients used completely waste was seen as moral failure as much as practical loss. Every crumb mattered because it represented labor and divine provision. This respect for resources fostered sustainability long before modern environmental ethics emerged. During evening meals, fatigue from the day's work often created a peaceful atmosphere. Monks ate slowly, aware that rest would soon follow. The simplicity of supper helped transition the community from activity to contemplation. Afterward, prayers of gratitude acknowledged not only food itself, but the collective effort required to produce it. The repetition of daily meals gradually shaped inner calm. Without constant choice or distraction, monks experienced reduced anxiety surrounding food. Decisions about what to eat disappeared, replaced by acceptance of what was provided. This surrender simplified life, allowing attention to focus on spiritual and intellectual pursuits. Even silence during meals carried emotional warmth. Though words were absent, shared presence communicated solidarity. The synchronized actions of eating together fostered belonging stronger than conversation. Monks learned to experience companionship without speech, discovering connection through shared rhythm rather than dialogue. Over centuries, monastic dietary practices influenced European culture widely. Techniques of brewing, cheese making, orchard cultivation, and crop management spread outward from monasteries into surrounding societies. The humble meals eaten daily within cloisters indirectly shaped regional cuisines and agricultural systems for generations. At night, as kitchens darkened and cloisters grew quiet, monks rested knowing the cycle would begin again. Seeds planted months earlier would eventually become bread. Preserved vegetables would sustain winter survival. Communal effort would continue uninterrupted. Food linked past labor, present nourishment, and future hope into a single continuous flow. In the end, the everyday meals of medieval monks reveal a profound understanding of balance. Their diet was modest, but sufficient, repetitive yet meaningful, disciplined yet compassionate. Through bread shared equally, vegetables grown patiently, fish prepared in observance of sacred rhythms, and drink consumed in moderation. Monks transformed eating into a lifelong practice of harmony between body, community, and spirit. What they ate every day was simple, but the life built around those meals reflected an enduring vision of stability, gratitude, and purposeful living that echoed quietly across the medieval world. As monastic life continued through the centuries, the daily experience of eating gradually became one of the most stable and grounding aspects of existence within monastery walls. For monks who had renounced ordinary worldly ambitions, meals marked the dependable rhythm of life, offering structure to days otherwise filled with silence, study, and labor. Food did not represent excitement or indulgence. Instead, it embodied continuity. Each meal reassured the community that despite changing seasons or hardships, the shared way of life endured. The relationship between monks and food began long before a meal reached the table. Even during prayer, monks remained aware that the strength allowing them to kneel, chant, or work came from earlier nourishment. Gratitude therefore extended backward through time, to the fields that produced grain, the brothers who baked bread, the animals that provided milk, and the natural forces that allowed crops to grow. Eating was understood as participation in a larger chain of cooperation, linking human effort with divine provision. Monastic fields often surrounded the monastery like protective rings. Walking through these lands, monks saw future meals growing gradually.